with folks who couldn't connect with us today. And it also occurred to me that we've done 3 field trips and I've never introduced myself. So, hey. So first of all, happy Earth Day, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kelly McGinley. I am the Network Engagement Manager for Audubon Pennsylvania. I'm going to go ahead and share our screen now. Up and running here. So first off, like I said, happy Earth Day to all of you. You can join us every Wednesday for a brand new field trip. Today we've got Laura Jackson, and we call it her backyard habitat, but it is 114 acres worth of backyard habitat, which when I first saw her presentation, I asked if it would be appropriate for her to adopt me, and I'm still waiting to hear back, but I feel like my chances are good. Next week, we have a visit to Shanks Ferry Wildflower Preserve. That's going to be led by Deborah Grimm from Juniata Valley Audubon Society, another Juniata Valley folks. May 6th, we've got a trip through Honey Hollow, which is going to be a real treat. That's where Bucks County Audubon Society is located. It's our home base. It's going to be wonderful. And then a real treat the following week, just a couple days after World Migratory Bird Day, we've got a migration field trip along the Chickadee Ridge led by some of our very own folks here at Audubon Pennsylvania and the Chickadee Coalition. If you have missed any of the field trips, you can catch a link on the website. If you just click on the chapters and centers link, you'll find it. If you just scroll down the page, you'll be able to see all the links. And then if you want to sign up for any of the upcoming ones, there's a link right here on your screen, pa.audubon.org/events. Just a reminder for you folks today, microphones have all been muted because there are about 60 people on the call and that would just get a little overwhelming. If you have any questions during the presentation today, Laura's going to be answering questions as we go. Just open up your chat box down in your toolbar and type your chat into the box and she'll see it and be able to respond to you in real time. If you want to turn your camera off, bottom left-hand corner of the screen, that's where you just click the video, the one that looks like an old school video camera, just click that off and you won't have to worry about your video. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll have a question and answer session with Laura to address anything that you didn't manage to ask in the chat box. Moving right along, if there's anyone on the call from a Pennsylvania chapter or a Pennsylvania partner that would like to host a field trip, we have dates available toward the end of May and also heading into June. We've gotten such a good response from the field trips that we'd love to do more of them. So if you have an idea, I'll just put out a call. We haven't had any of our chapters that have a hawk watch yet or a raptor program. So if that sounds like you, we want to hear from you. All right, so without any more ado, I'm going to turn it over to Laura. Hang on one second, Laura. We're going to give you the remote.
All right.
And you should have it now. And as soon as I...
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I'm assuming you can. I can't hear Kelly anymore.
Yes,
So,
here.
okay. All right, that's good.
You
So
probably
what-
can't hear
We can
Kelly.
hear you.
You probably can't hear Kelly because she gave you the remote as leader, so now she's muted, I think.
Okay. All right. Now, why aren't you muted, Becky? I'm surprised. Oh, did you just unmute yourself?
Yeah, if you hold down the space bar, you can talk temporarily.
Oh, okay. That's good. And I'm going to apologize in advance. Mike, my husband, can't make it. He's in the hospital right now, but he's doing better. He does not have COVID-19. The doctors think he has gastritis, so hopefully he'll be home in a few days. And I will try to remember to keep looking at my chat box so I can answer questions. All right, so without further ado, we will continue on our field trip. So let's try this again. Okay, there we go. Happy Earth Day, everybody. And I'm going to start with just a little introduction about Juniata Valley Audubon Society. We actually had our 50th anniversary last year. So we're 1 year older than Earth Day. And at the top of the screen, you can see the banquet that we had, which was just about this time last year. So I'm glad we're not the same anniversary as Earth Day, because we would not be having that banquet this year because of the pandemic. My husband, Mike, is the historian, and he read through 50 years worth of Audubon newsletters to put together a special booklet for everybody, and he has blurbs in the book about special events. So that was a neat thing to give to everybody who attended. I heard that some of you are not from Pennsylvania, so here's a quick look at the state of Pennsylvania, where I was born and grew up. And to give you an idea of where our chapter, what our chapter covers, it's South Central Pennsylvania. And if you can see the Altoona, which is the largest city, we meet a little bit north of Altoona. And Mike and I live in the southern part of Bedford County, about a half hour from Maryland line. All right, so now let's see if I can keep going here. I'll just hit next. You can see our house at the base of Tussey Mountain. We're lucky because right above our property is state game lands. It starts about here. And it follows a good bit of Tussey Mountain. Tussey Mountain is a long continuous ridge in the Ridge and Valley province. So we have fairly narrow valleys, and then mountains, and then valleys. And Tussey Mountain is about 80 miles long. It runs from northern Maryland up to State College. And while a lot of mountains curve and dip and twist, Tussey Mountain is pretty straight. So that makes it a really good migratory corridor for raptors. So consequently, it's an important bird area. It's recognized especially for golden eagle migration in the spring. And there's a hawk watch on Tussey Mountain near State College. But we're pretty far south of State College, so we don't go to that hawk watch very often. It's also popular with glider pilots. We know people who have gotten in their sailplanes and they've soared the whole way down to Tennessee and back, because this range of mountains extends way down into Tennessee. So it's a really neat flyway. Plus, because a lot of Tussey Mountain is public land, state game lands especially, there's a lot of forest on Tussey Mountain. So it's really great bird habitat, and we're lucky to live on that. We're about 1,400 feet in elevation, and that's our house right there. Whereas the top of the mountain is close to 2,000 feet. We'll start in the valley. We live in Black Valley, south of Everett, and we call our property Mountain Meadows because there are 3 old farm fields on our property extending from the valley up the mountain. We built our house on the top of the upper field. And in 2014, we became, well, actually in 2011, we became part of the Golden Winged Warbler program. And we got funding to improve some of our habitat, some of the forest for golden winged warblers. So that's why we're in the tree farm program. We don't actively grow and harvest trees to make a profit, but we did harvest trees in 2014 to help golden winged warblers. And I'll show you that area in a minute. So our lane is a ½ mile long, and I'm hoping you'll all be quiet as we travel up that lane to maybe watch some wildlife and see what might be in the fields or in the woods as we travel up the lane. Here's an aerial view so you can see what we will be going through. Here's the golden winged warbler area cut. That was 27 acres. And that was a shelter wood cut with interspersed trees. And that's a type of habitat, young forest habitat that golden winged warblers appreciate. And that's the southern part of our property. The rest of it extends up here and then down to the road and then over and around. So here's our lane, and follow me as we go up the lane, but be quiet to look for wildlife. Most of the field trip, once we get up the lane, is going to be right around in here. And even though Kelly said it's a 114-acre field trip, we really are just sticking to 5 acres behind our house and to the side of our house. So follow me up our lane. We took this picture a couple years ago, but this is what it looks like now because it's early spring in Pennsylvania and the red buds are blooming and it's just a pretty time of year. But we will be mixing a lot of seasons, so don't get confused about that. Well, I guess everybody was quiet because look what happened. We got to see a gray fox. Let's get a closer look at it. And I apologize, my chat bar is covered up by Kathy Calhoun for some reason. I don't know why. I'll just move it over here. Whoops, no, that might interfere with what you can see. Can everybody see my chat room? Since I haven't used Zoom very much, I'm not sure.
No, we can all manage our own screen.
Okay, good. All right, so yes, that is a scarlet tanager that you saw in the first picture. And I will identify the other birds that we see. I just forgot to mention that one. So let's sneak up on that gray fox and get a better look at it. Let's keep walking. There he is. Isn't he cute? These foxes are neat. They have retractable claws and they can climb trees. And a couple of times we have watched a gray fox climb a mulberry tree to eat mulberries. And they're omnivores, which means they eat meat, but they also like fruit too. And we have some old pear trees that were planted probably over 100 years ago at the edge of the forest. And sometimes we see the gray foxes eat the pear trees. Oh, and look, we scared a baby bear, a bear cub, up into an oak tree. So now we better be noisy because we don't want the mother to come and chase us. So let's all run up the lane, get past this bear cub. Well, let's stop and take a minute and look at the fawn though. We really like deer. They're beautiful animals. They're very destructive. They eat a lot of our wild plants and really affect the whole ecosystem functions. So my husband is a hunter and we manage our property for trees and wildlife, but we allow hunting. So we have a partnership with the Game Commission and they've really helped us a lot in managing our property. So now we're closer to the house. We're in the upper field and right now it's late June in this picture. The butterfly weed is blooming. The common milkweed is blooming over to the left. And you can see we're getting closer to the house. So this is all about birds, but since we manage our property for wildlife, I just wanted to give a shout out to monarch butterflies. And I've done research on that. For some reason it's not advancing. Let me try it again. Okay, quick. There we go. So I've talked to scientists who tell me that we're really missing a lot of milkweeds that we used to have. Common milkweed, butterfly weed, swamp milkweed, those are the only things that monarch caterpillars eat are milkweeds. So the scientists tell me that we should be planting 600 million milkweed plants if we want to get the monarch population back to what it was 20 years ago. So I hope if you have a sunny spot in your yard that you'll try to grow some milkweeds. And common milkweed is the best. They really, really feed on that heavily. And so we always watch the monarchs on our property. Now we're actually up the lane, even closer to the house, looking back at the milkweeds and the butterfly weed. But we've crossed the cattle guard. So we have a fence around 5 acres of our property. The fence is 5 feet high. The deer don't like to jump fences, but they can. But most of the time the deer stay out, and they definitely don't like to cross the cattle guards most of the time. So we have cattle guards on our lane that we can drive across, but it keeps the deer out of 5 acres. Here's getting closer to the house. This is a pollinator plot that we planted in 2015. So this will be the 5th year for it. And it's great for bees and all sorts of pollinating insects. And it really attracts the goldfinch too. American goldfinch are really, really big pollinator plant eaters when it comes to the seeds. So we have hordes of goldfinches all year, really. Here's our side yard. Now I took this picture a couple years ago. It doesn't look like this yet because our spring, even though it was early, it's been cold. So the purple woodland phlox is not blooming yet. And the red bud is just starting to open. And my husband, Mike, is not allowed to do any mowing until all the dandelions have gone to seed, because we want to watch for sparrows, especially white crowned sparrows, eating the dandelion seeds. And I'll show you a white crowned sparrow picture later. Now we're standing on the patio in front of the house looking at a recirculating water garden. We've read that the sound of running water, attracts birds. This thing has a mind of its own. And there's a delay. Let me go back. Yeah. Anyways, that's a spring site of the water garden. And it's pretty shallow and the water recirculates to attract wildlife. All right, I'll try to get this under control here. I'll click one time and hopefully it will advance. See, it doesn't want to do that. All right, so this is a springtime version. This is what the water garden will look like in the summer, if everything goes well. And again, it's very shallow and there's lots of native plants blooming and some cultivars too of the water lilies. We don't have any fish in the water garden. It's just for frogs, salamanders, snakes. We even had a weasel in there one time though, or a mink, I'm sorry, swimming around. So we'll look at the water garden a little later. Here's a picture I took about a week and a half ago of our backyard. We didn't really have many pictures of our backyard, but this is where we have most of our bird feeders, and we have it set up so that it is bear friendly. You can see a big platform kind of in the middle of the picture, and that's a bear friendly platform because we get bears a lot. And Mike wanted to have a bird feeder that wouldn't be destroyed or damaged by bears. And this one has worked really well. The other feeders we have to take in at night, and we have to make sure that they're all put away and put in a locked shed, because we've even had bears break into our shed to get after the bird seed. The question is, if you don't have fish in your pond, how do you control mosquitoes? Well, lots of frogs, and we have lots of dragonfly larvae and all sorts of little critters that eat the mosquito larvae. So we don't really have any problems with mosquitoes. Also in our backyard, you see what looks like a cut-off tree, a couple cut-off trees. When we built our house in 1988, there were 30 ash trees all growing, mature trees growing behind our house. But unfortunately, they were all killed by a little insect called the emerald ash borer. In 2014, we had the trees cut because if they had fallen over, they would have damaged our house. but we kept some of the trunks standing that we could put bird feeders on. And Mike does something which is kind of odd, but he drills holes in some of the trees that are dead, and he puts bird food in those holes. And I'll show you some pictures of that. And then we have the typical hanging feeders too that we can take in at night. There's really a long pause between advancing here. Okay, so here's a close-up of the dead ash tree, and Mike has drilled his holes in it, and then he's filled those holes with suet or miracle mix. And so we commonly have pileated woodpeckers coming in. The pileated woodpecker on the right is a male. I can tell that because he has a red cheek. And pileated woodpeckers are birds of the woods, but they like the peanut butter, so they come into our yard. This is also our backyard, but it's a little bit farther to the north, and we don't have any bird feeders in that part of the yard. So one thing that's really important to help birds is, of course, food. So I'm going to spend some time looking at food and talking about feeding birds. Birds would get along pretty well without feeding them, but we certainly appreciate them, and we certainly enjoy watching them. And if the weather is really cold and snowy, research shows that birds do benefit from having food available in bird feeders. So sunflower seeds are probably their #1 favorite. This one is a shelled sunflower seed that this little chickadee is eating, but you can provide what's called gray stripe or black oil. There are different varieties of sunflower seeds, and they're all very high in fat and really nutritional. But of course, the squirrels get in the act too. We have lots of gray squirrels. Sometimes we've counted 20 or 25 squirrels in our backyard. They think they're just as important as the birds. We also have fox squirrels, and this squirrel you can see is a little bit oranger than the gray squirrel. And some people tell me they like to watch the squirrels better than the birds because the squirrels are really entertaining. And here's a fox squirrel showing off right now. That's something that we can't do. We do have some squirrel boxes in our yard, and sometimes we've been lucky enough to have nesting gray squirrels. Not often, but sometimes they use the box. And lots of chipmunks. We have lots and lots of holes, unfortunately, from all the chipmunk burrows, but we do like our chipmunks and we enjoy watching them. So back to the birds. In addition to sunflower seeds, suet or our homemade miracle mix is probably the second most popular food in our backyard. And the miracle mix is a combination of lard and peanut butter and sugar and other flours and a chick starter mix. So it's really healthy for birds. If anybody would like the recipe, I'll be glad to email it to you. My email will be on the last slide, and you can just jot it down and I'll be glad to send you the recipe. It smells like you're making peanut butter cookies, but you don't want to eat it because of all the lard. And we put it out year round. When it's really, really hot, sometimes it does get pretty soft, but if you use the lard, it tends to stay fairly firm. And a lot of people see this woodpecker and they think it's the red-headed woodpecker, but you can see there are some red feathers on its belly, so that's how it gets the name red belly. And it doesn't have red on the side of its head. But look at that sharp beak. That's pretty amazing, the power that they have. So we have lots of feeders. Here, a little chickadee is sharing the food with American goldfinch. And I showed you a goldfinch earlier that was bright yellow. That's the male in the summertime. But in the wintertime, they molt that bright yellow and they look like this. So male and female goldfinches look pretty much the same. in the wintertime. So starting about a month ago, we could see that the male goldfinches were molting, and now they're bright yellow and black. Chickadees are really bold, and they're so much fun to watch, and it's just amazing to know a little bit about them. They only weigh about 12 big paper clips worth. So if you grab a handful of paper clips, that's about how much a chickadee weighs. And they lose so much body heat that every day in the wintertime, they have to eat enough to gain 60% of that back in terms of their body weight. So they're constantly eating, constantly on the move. And it makes you wonder, well, how do they survive at night because they can't eat anything? Well, they have to find a tree cavity in the wintertime, and they get into those cavities and their body temperature drops and they go into kind of like a hibernation. And they're not really using as many calories at night, so they can survive. Their body temperature is lower and they sleep. And then they can control that in the morning, and they wake up and they're out in a flurry and they're trying to find food. We have Carolina wrens that like to nest around our yard. And we usually have about 2 pairs of them, but sometimes cold winters are tough because they're really a southern bird that's increasing its range into the north, and sometimes a really bad winter creates a kill-off, but fortunately we haven't seen that with our Carolina wrens. Notice their curved bill and their short upturned tail. They are cute little birds. Another food that a lot of birds like are peanuts, and you can buy shelled peanuts. Don't get the salted ones, but get the ones that are just shelled. Tufted titmice like them whether they're in the shell or not. We put this wreath up in the wintertime expecting to see blue jays, but it's mainly tufted titmice and little woodpeckers that use it. And one year we were lucky enough to have some visitors from Canada. This is a common redpoll that normally stays up in the far north, but when they don't have enough food, they'll fly south during some of the winters. So 8 years ago was the last time we saw this common redpoll. But we have lots of white-throated sparrows in the wintertime. And right now we're counting about 10 or 12 in our yard, but they're not going to be with us much longer. They don't breed in Bedford County. They breed in northern Pennsylvania and farther north. So we'll be saying goodbye to them pretty soon. Occasionally we see hermit thrush. This hermit thrush is sitting in a Christmas tree that I put outside, and my husband got some stakes and we supported it so it would stand straight up. And then I decorated it with some red winterberry holly and also some big bunches of goldenrod that I had collected in the fall. And the hermit thrush seemed to think that was a pretty good hangout. So we often saw hermit thrush in that tree during the wintertime, as well as a lot of other birds too. We didn't have much snow this winter, but when we do, we see lots and lots of cardinals. It's just amazing how many there are. In this picture, which I took during a snowstorm, there were 12 male cardinals and 13 females. They like to hang out in the red twig dogwood that grows in the back of our yard. And one year we decided to maybe stage a few pictures. So this is not photoshopped, but we put out some wooden posts and we put bird seed in the posts, and we had a lot of snow that winter, and we were lucky to see so many cardinals at one time. But I have to admit, I think the females are prettier than the males. Look at all those subtle colors, the reddish tail. She's really fluffed out because it was snowing, and some of the snow is landing on her, and it was really cold out, but She's so well insulated, you can see the snow isn't even melting. So I do like to watch the female cardinals, and female cardinals and male cardinals will feed each other. One of you were saying that you saw that happening at your feeders, and we've seen that too. And also another neat fact about cardinals, female cardinals like to sing, and a lot of female birds don't sing. So I think that's kind of neat. Some other birds that like suet, and I see some of you have been listing some, nuthatches and titmice, yes. And here's a picture of a yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is a type of woodpecker, and a titmouse, and there is suet into that post. You can't see it, but that's why they landed on the post, was to eat that. And we get a lot of woodpeckers. Woodpeckers love suet. The suet that we buy is from Tractor Supply, and we get what's called the woodpecker suet. That seems to be their favorite. And you can see on this woodpecker that it has a really long beak. That's called the hairy woodpecker. Even though birds don't have hair, I'm not quite sure why it's called hairy, but it's hard to distinguish sometimes between two types of black and white woodpeckers. So I always look at the beak. If it has a long beak, it's the hairy woodpecker. If it has a shorter beak, it's the downy woodpecker. And here is a picture showing some shelled peanuts that the downy woodpecker is eating. We have had red-headed woodpeckers in our yard a couple times, but they never stay very long. And I don't know why, but they seem to be very transient. We've seen adults, we've seen juveniles, but we don't see them on a regular basis. So I'm envious if anybody sees red-headed woodpeckers a lot. And of course, if we don't take the suet in at night, then we have marauders like raccoons that show up. At least they don't do a lot of damage. Now, to talk a little bit more about some natural foods, one of the reasons I like crabapple trees is not just for their beauty, but they produce a fruit that a lot of birds like to eat. And cedar waxwings will go to our trees with the small crab apples, and they'll just pop that down like candy. It's amazing to watch a flock fly into a tree and start devouring it. Or if you're out at night, maybe you'll see a possum up in the tree eating some crab apples. So some of our crabapple trees have fruit all winter, and that way we get to see cedar waxwings in the winter time too. So even if there's a lot of snow on the ground and the weather is really, really bad, and you can see how fluffed up the cedar waxwing is because it's so cold, they know that they can go to the crabapple trees with bigger fruit. Now, the bigger fruit doesn't get eaten until probably around February. That's when I took this picture. It has to thaw, and it has to get cold and freeze and back and forth to soften the fruit. And then the cedar waxwings will peck at it. They can't swallow that whole fruit. So I think these two birds are fighting over who's going to eat first. And I forget which one won the contest, but they eventually settled down and they were both eating by pecking at the crab apples. So here's a crabapple tree, and it attracted the wild turkeys one winter time. We'd had a lot of snow then, and it's amazing that these big birds were interested in these little crab apples, but they were up there feeding away in our tree. And this tree is just inside our fence in our front yard. And so when the turkeys left, the deer figured, well, let's go in and let's eat the crab apples on the ground. So they could walk across the cattle guard because it was full of snow. And we let them feed until they were finished eating all the crab apples that we could see on the ground. And then we chased them back out. Blue jays are really pretty birds. We have a lot of those. It seemed like last spring, there were an exceptional number of migrating blue jays. We would see 20 or 30 or 40 at a time. It was just amazing how many there were. I like blue jays, even though they scare the other birds away and they are predators on bird eggs. I really like blue jays because they plant forests. they love to eat acorns, and they will carry an acorn into the forest. This is actually a peanut, but they will carry a peanut or an acorn into the forest and they'll bury it. And they don't always go back and eat all their acorns. So when that happens, those acorns will sprout into oak trees. And researchers have found that blue jays are responsible for growing more oak trees than even squirrels are. So I like blue jays. I like their bold look. I think they're pretty smart birds. And this one was peering at me one day, so I had to take his portrait. But because we feed the birds, we do attract birds that like to eat birds. And I wanted to put in one picture because it might upset you, I know, but you have to realize that you're creating the smorgasbord of food, and predatory hawks are going to come in and try to eat the birds that you're feeding. And I think this is a Sharpie or a sharp-shinned hawk. It looks closely enough like a Cooper's hawk, but I think the legs are too skinny. And if you're looking, you can probably tell what the bird is that it caught. It caught a red-bellied woodpecker, and we watched it pluck the feathers out and eat it. So nature can certainly seem cruel to us at times, but this is part of nature, and we have to respect it. Here's another sad story. We have eastern phoebes that nest at our house, and we really enjoy watching them. And for many years, the phoebe would build its moss-covered nest up on top of our downspout. And maybe about 10 years ago, we were out in the yard and we were watching the phoebes feed their babies. And the babies were calling for their mother, and the mother and the father would come in with food. And it was really neat to watch them. So we saw that most of the morning. We took a few pictures, and then we went in for lunch. When we came back out from lunch, the babies were gone, and there was a big black snake crawling down the downspout. So we think it ate all the phoebe babies. And again, it makes us sad, but that is part of nature. But we did outsmart the snake, though. Mike built just a little simple platform and put it up higher on the side of the house underneath the roof. And now the phoebes use that, and the snake can't get to it. So here's a happy phoebe. The phoebes nested for a second time that summer. So even though they lost the first brood, at least they were successful. So we were thrilled that that worked out so well. Sometimes the baby phoebes land on our patio before they can fly really well. So we're always on the lookout for those, and we try to put them back in the nest. But if they can fly a little bit, the parents will take care of them. I thought that little guy was cute. We're on the lookout for rose-breasted grosbeaks any day now. The elm trees are producing seeds, and that's about the time when the rose-breasted grosbeaks show up. But they like to eat sunflower seeds, so especially the gray stripes. So we put those out for them to feed on, and hopefully we will see some pretty soon. This is an important time of year for migration, and a lot of birds are moving through. And again, this is about the time when our red buds are blooming, and I think you'll agree that makes a pretty nice picture when a rose-breasted grosbeak lands in a redbud tree. So we've planted a lot of redbud trees on our property too to enjoy it. And here's another shot of a young pileated woodpecker that's getting fed by actually its father. We had some miracle mix in just an old tree, dead tree near our backyard, and it was feeding Junior one day. So that pileated woodpeckers really come into your yard. If you live near the woods and you want to attract them, use a miracle mix, and It's amazing how many you can see. We've seen as many as 4 at one time. 2 books that I would highly recommend if you'd like to get more native plants and improve your habitat for birds, and that would be Bringing Nature Home. They're both written by the same person, Doug Tallamy. He wrote Bringing Nature Home back in 2007. And after I read that book, it really made a big difference on the plants that I bought. I try just to buy native plants now. And the newest book, Nature's Best Hope, was just came out this year. And it's also excellent. So if you haven't read these books, I highly recommend them. And I'm going to be sharing some information that I've learned from reading his books. So I'll point that out. For example, he did research on a chickadee pair that nested in his yard. And this is a picture he took of a chickadee with a caterpillar. And he determined that chickadees need 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise 1 clutch of young birds. That is just amazing. Now, right now we have 2 pairs of nesting chickadees in our yard. So I'm going to start counting how many trips they have to make to the birdhouses in one day just to feed their babies. But right now they're just eggs in the bird nest. So we'll have to wait for them to hatch. But caterpillars are really, really important. They have more protein than beef, and insects in general have that. But caterpillars are soft and squishy, and they're really easy for baby birds to digest. Plus, they contain a lot of pigments, and those pigments are different colors that help the birds be healthier. They give them better color vision. They brighten their feathers. They make them overall healthier. So one of the key things in the yard, and yeah, crab apples are neat, but you really want to grow caterpillars. And there are certain trees that grow caterpillars better than others. And this is the tree that Doug Tallamy says is the best tree to grow in your yard. If you can only grow 1 tree, this is the tree to grow. Now, of course, you might not have a yard that will hold a huge, big tree like this, but you could plant a young tree. And this is a white oak. White oak trees support more caterpillars than any other tree. And they're going to be up there munching away on the leaves, but they're not going to hurt the tree unless they're a gypsy moth caterpillar, but they're not native. But our native caterpillars don't kill the trees, and they provide so much food for birds. 534 caterpillar species feed on white oak trees. That's just amazing. And then number 2 is a black cherry. Black cherries don't get as big as oak trees. So if you don't have room for an oak tree, maybe you could plant a black cherry. But look, native willow, a pussy willow can support 455 different kinds of caterpillars. And birch trees, 413. Now that would be the native birch. So his research really opened my eyes to the importance of trees, growing caterpillars, and then of course those caterpillars are important for baby birds. So here's a bird that nests in our backyard up and high in the trees that eats insects, and this is the black-throated green warbler. If we didn't have these caterpillars and it's trying to grab a caterpillar off that leaf, it wouldn't be able to feed its babies. And the same way with the black-throated blue warbler. Now this bird just caught a daddy longlegs. So it's not like they only catch caterpillars, they catch other insects too. And we don't have these birds nesting in our yard. And you might think to yourself, well, you don't have a big yard, you can't grow all these plants. But if you just have a few native trees, even if the birds don't nest in your yard, like this black-throated blue, when they're migrating, they will need food. And so they might land in your tree just for a couple nights and catch food. And then they'll be on a couple days, I should say. They mainly migrate at night. But if you have the food there in the form of caterpillars and other insects on native trees, it's amazing how many birds you can attract. Now, this was the bird that was on the first picture, and that's a scarlet tanager. And scarlet tanagers are one of my favorite birds because they are so beautiful. Just absolutely gorgeous birds. And they nest in Pennsylvania in the oak forests. And they feed on insects. Cedar waxwings, I do have to point out, only feed insects to their young the first 2 days. They like fruit so much that they start feeding fruit to their babies after 2 days. So you want a variety if you can. And we're watching for the indigo bunnings to come back. Now, you can look at their beak, and they have more of a seed-eating beak, but they also like to eat insects. And they're a trickster. You know, scientists tell us if you take a feather from an indigo bunning and you look at it, it's not blue. How could that be? They look blue to me. Well, they're really grayish black feathers, but when the light shines down through their feathers, it's called diffraction. It produces this beautiful blue color that hits our eyes. And this is a spring indigo bunning. They should be back pretty soon. They overwinter in Mexico and southern or in Central America. So we're looking for them to return soon. And you'll see in this picture, it looks a little scruffy. That's because I took this picture in August. And as birds travel around and as they find food and fly around, their feathers can get kind of scruffy and worn. They spend a lot of time trying to keep themselves neat and clean, but the feathers just wear out. So a lot of birds will molt towards the end of the summer. And here's one thing that you can use to attract indigo bunnings. They like to eat white millet, and that's that seed that's falling out of his beak. So check out what he looks like in August, and now see what he looks like in September. He's getting new feathers. Indigo bunnings are a type of bird that molt their feathers, and they turn brown for the winter time. It's too bad that they don't stay blue in my mind, but they're still pretty as brown. And this is what the young males look like too, and the females don't have any blue. So they're on the nest and they want to be well camouflaged. Baltimore orioles should show up pretty soon. They're insect eaters, but when they've been in the tropics overwintering, they've been eating a lot of fruit. So for years, we put out oranges and grape jelly and never got any Baltimore orioles to come in to eat on them. But 2 years ago, they started doing that. So if you'd like to attract Baltimore orioles to your yard, you could put out fresh oranges, grape jelly. They make feeders that hold nectar for Baltimore orioles, but they've never shown any interest in the nectar. So that's what the container is at the bottom, but we don't use the nectar. We just give them oranges and grape jelly. And hummingbird came over to see if there was nectar in there, but no nectar. So this is the adult male with the shiny black head. And in the next picture, this is what the female looks like. Again, she's better camouflaged, so she doesn't have that really brilliant orange and black coloration. So these are birds that like fruit, but they also, of course, need the native insects. And we get usually 6 or 7 different Baltimore orioles in our yard. Now they're coming in more regularly after the fruit and the grape jelly. Again, that's an adult male on the top with his head in the orange. And at the bottom, that's a young male. They have kind of a speckled head. It's not fully black. And it takes them 2 years before they're mature and get as pretty as the adult male does. And it attracts other birds too. I never knew that red-bellied woodpeckers would eat oranges, but they like them. And last summer, we saw a red-bellied woodpecker excavate an orange for like 3 minutes, stuff its beak full and fly off. And then in about 10 minutes later, it was back. We think it might have been feeding oranges to some babies, but we never did find the nest. And grackles like to eat oranges too. So there are different birds that you can attract with oranges, even rose-breasted grosbeaks. And then we have the young of the year coming back to visit our yard. This is a young Baltimore Oriole in August. And that's what the young look like. And then they migrate to Central and South America for the winter time. So when you see caterpillars on your plants, don't think of them anymore as destroyers of plants. Think of them as providing food for birds. And these caterpillars have evolved over millions of years, and they're usually pretty specific. Like what we say with the monarch butterfly, it only feeds on milkweed. Well, there are other caterpillars that only feed on certain groups of plants. And these mourning cloak caterpillars are feeding on pussy willow. And one of the nice things about it is if the birds don't eat them, then you get the beautiful mourning cloak butterflies. So again, they may not be attractive to us, but these yellow-necked caterpillars are certainly going to serve as food for hungry birds. And the black-billed cuckoo is one bird that likes to eat gypsy moths and a lot of the other larger hairy caterpillars. Here's a rosy maple moth caterpillar on a white oak leaf, one of those hundreds of caterpillars that Doug Tallamy says need oak trees. And sometimes you'll see caterpillars on your native flowers too. I like the name of this caterpillar because it's called the asteroid, because it feeds on aromatic asters. So I think that's kind of neat. Or maybe you'll see a silver-spotted skipper if you grow false blue indigo. So there are a lot of wildflowers that also attract caterpillars. And again, those caterpillars feed the birds. Here's an eastern bluebird male with a caterpillar feeding a female while she was on the nest in a tree cavity. Well, one of the exceptions are the ruby-throated hummingbirds. They do eat insects, but they eat tiny gnats and very tiny other flies. So if you want to attract them to your yard, again, native plants, but hummingbird feeders certainly can supplement their food, and they're just such beautiful birds and fun to watch. But they do like nectar from wild Columbine, so we try to have different blooming plants through the year that they like, native plants. This is a trumpet honeysuckle, which is native, and the female hummingbird is getting the nectar from it. And you might also find caterpillars on those native honeysuckle plants, which would feed a bird. And trumpet creeper is another really beautiful vine that will attract a lot of birds, and especially the hummingbirds. All right, we have a slight delay here. Let me try it again. So I wanted to tell you about Audubon's Plants for Birds program. If you go to the Audubon website and you type in www.audubon.org, native plants, and let me minimize this one. It's a website, and it will ask you for your zip code. Let me show you just the next picture. It will ask you for your zip code and your email. And then the website will generate a list of plants that are native to your area that are good for birds. And if you start looking around on the website and click on different tabs, you can see where different nurseries, local nurseries are listed. So this is a great resource for anybody who wants to help birds by growing native plants. And National Wildlife Federation also has a similar program that they've done based on a lot of Doug Tallamy's work. So I highly recommend this website to help you fill your backyard with native plants. And I know the hummingbirds will be happy because they'll stick out their tongue at you. Some other plants that we found that birds really like are winterberry holly, which is native, and it has small, beautiful red berries in the fall, and it loses its leaves in the wintertime, so it's deciduous. We've seen flocks of robins fly in. That's my bird clock, by the way, sorry. We've seen flocks of robins fly in and strip these winterberry holly sometimes. Question from Cassie. Are invasive plants an issue on your property? Do you have to spend a lot of time managing them? The answer is yes and yes. We have a terrible time with invasive plants. We have been working, Mike and I became Pennsylvania forest stewards in 2000, and that's when we first learned about invasive plants and how to control them. So we have been actively managing our property for really over 20 years, and it's still a struggle. So that's a whole other program though, if you'd like to email me, if you want to hear what we've done. We've gotten funding, thousands of dollars of funding from the Game Commission and from the Natural Resource Conservation District to control invasives. Some of the control we've done ourselves. It's mechanical, it's pulling, it's trying to dig out plants, but we also have to use herbicides because it's impossible to get rid of plants and invasive species because we have 114 acres and it's just crazy. So yeah, we definitely have an issue with that. And the invasive plants are constantly invading my flower beds too. So that's an ongoing battle. Question, your wildflower areas are incredibly full and lush. How long did it take for them to reseed to fill in that beautifully? Well, I haven't really showed you many of my wildflower beds, to be honest with you, but the phlox that I showed in the middle, that reseeds pretty quickly. It really depends on the species. I have some primroses, sundrops that spread by runners, and they'll fill in pretty quickly in a couple years. So it does depend on species, but I also have problems with voles. I've had some beautiful beds of foam flower, tyrella, wild ginger, other species that the voles have killed in the wintertime. So it's an ongoing labor of love, so to speak. And another question, oh, is in my pollinator bed. Oh, we seeded that pollinator bed in 2015, and I took that picture 2 years ago. But it was a pretty heavy mix of seeds, so it filled in right away. There's a progression of different blooms throughout the year, but right away, the first year we had wildflowers blooming, so that was pretty neat. But yeah, so goldfinches love to feed in there, and we bought a native seed mix from Ernst Seeds. Again, if somebody lives in Pennsylvania and you're interested in native seeds, I can help you out. Just email me. But there are 3 nurseries that we buy seeds from. And Ernst Seeds is in Meadville, Pennsylvania, and they produce actually just native seed mixes for pollinator plots. And I'll be glad to share that information with you. Question about the possum haw holly. No, we don't have any possum haw. It's not native to our area, so this is actually winterberry holly. And camera, we have, question about the camera. We have Canon cameras and we have Olympus cameras. We have some long lenses, but I'll show you our trick for pictures with birds in a minute here. So let me keep going. So there's the winterberry holly, deciduous, and we saw some advertised in a local nursery a couple years ago that were cultivars. The wild winterberry holly, the strict species, you have to buy male and female, and only the female, of course, produces the fruit, but you need the male to pollinate it. So I thought, well, I'm going to try some of this other species because they were in fruit and I could get just all females. So I bought 5 of them. I planted one. This is in our backyard, up in the back part of it. And this is a little impoundment that my husband dug because we have a lot of spring seeps. And we planted it there, and then we planted one by the kitchen. So right now, just pretend you're in my kitchen looking out the kitchen window, And we have netting over the kitchen window because of bird strikes, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And we had heavy snow, and we had a flock of robins that came in. And I'm hoping I can get the video to work. I'd like you to watch the robins and see if you think they're having trouble eating this cultivar, because the fruit on it is bigger than the wild cultivar. And let's see here. So watch the robins. It's a little jerky, but you might get an idea here if they're having trouble or not. So my impression after watching that video, and of course watching it live action, was that the winterberry hollyberries were pretty darn big. And this is even in the middle of the winter, so they would have been softer than they had been in the fall. So Doug Tallamy makes that point that when you buy a cultivar plant, it was bred for certain characteristics, and it might not really be the best choice. That if you can buy just the straight species, that should be the better choice for birds. Spicebush is a common shrub in our woods, and it produces a fruit that birds love, especially during migration. It's full of lipid or fat and very good for bird nutrition. Black chokeberry is another one, and its fruit ripens earlier in the summer, so we get young robins, squirrels, brown thrashers, all sorts of birds coming in, scarlet tanagers, to eat those. In addition to white flowering dogwood along our lane and redbud, we like the colors and they're pretty, but dogwood produces this red fruit that chipmunks, squirrels, and birds love. And it's full of fat, which is what really birds need. Now, a little bit about water, because water is really important in your habitat. This little pond is just outside our fence on the northern side of our house. And we built it before we built our house. And we've had lots of wildlife come to it. You see a wood duck box built in the pond on a pole, so predators can't get to it. And we didn't know at the time, but it's very popular with wood ducks. And every spring we get lots of wood ducks. I looked this morning and I saw 8 of them on the pond. And there was probably a hen in the wood duck box. And it's funny to watch them. So in this picture, the female wood duck, which is the brown duck, is giving directions to the males. And of course, you can tell that the male closest to her is definitely not listening to a word she says. And here, the male, Drake, in all his beautiful finery, is giving directions to the female, but she's not paying attention to anything he says. And they just don't see eye to eye. They seem to squabble and fight and carry on in that pond and chase each other. It's just really amazing. But eventually, they do pair up, and we get a female that uses a wood duck box. There's wood duck love. And then we're all excited because we start watching the pond for babies. And usually they have 2 broods a year, one that should hatch in about a month from now, and then one later in the summer. And in that time period, if we're lucky, we get to see the babies. So after all the babies hatch, which is within a day or 2 at a time in the box, the mother will land on the pond and she'll start calling softly to the babies, and the babies will climb up the inside of the box and jump out the hole and land in our pond. And it's not every year that we see this, but sometimes we get to watch it. So it's pretty exciting to see that. So here's the technique we use for a lot of our bird pictures. We put up photography blinds. They're really hunting blinds, but we use them for photography. Different places on our property. They're portable, easy to set up. And that way we can get some good bird pictures. But I'm glad we weren't always in the blind every morning, because one morning this tree fell over right on top of the blind. So thank goodness we were not in it that day. Oh, and here's another wood duck family. It's a little hard to see because this was taken with a trail camera, But this is another vernal pool that my husband built, and the trail camera showed that yet another pair of wood ducks had mated, and the mother was with babies on that vernal pool. So if we didn't have the trail camera set up, we would never have seen that. So yes, water gardens look pretty, but they do serve an important purpose for birds. And we make sure we plant native species around them. That shrub is a serviceberry, and it provides food for lots of birds. One summer, it was just thrilling because these birds came into the serviceberry. We were in the house. We didn't get pictures. 4 males and 1 female scarlet tanager. And then lots of times we'll look out and we'll see birds at the water garden, which is really shallow. And we have these pieces of wood out there, and here's the scarlet tanager taking a drink. So it serves a very practical function for the birds. All right. We have 5 different vernal pools on our property that we've made, and we found that we could do that because we have a layer of clay about 2 feet down underneath the surface, and that holds the water if we make an impoundment. So that way we're able to attract woodcocks in the spring. This is an area that we actually logged for woodcock. It was full of invasive species, and we cut down most of the trees. We discovered there is a wetland there. We planted native shrubs. That's what it looked like the first couple years. And it's getting a lot thicker now, but in 2017, by then we had planted 175 native trees and shrubs, and things were really looking pretty good. But again, it's a constant fight with the invasives. We never had common yellowthroat nesting on our property before we did this, and we have that now. We have more field sparrows. We now have red-winged blackbirds nesting on our property that we never had. So it's amazing what you can do. We've never had this luck though. Diane Porter was willing to share this picture with me of her bird bath, and look at all those beautiful bluebirds. My one sister, Kathy, has bluebirds, but we never get them to this extent. So that's just a gorgeous thing. What we do though, and now I'm looking at the outside of my kitchen window, we put in a bubbling boulder. That's that big rock in the right-hand corner of the picture, and it recirculates water. So there's water falling down from a hole. It travels up the hole in a rock and then falls down over the rock and creates this circulating sound of water. And we just have it running during the day. And then amazingly, with that moisture, then we have a lot of jewelweed that grows along the rock. And it creates this neat little woodland habitat. So birds hear that water and they fly in. Like we have Kentucky warblers nesting in our woods. Well, 2 summers ago, one of them flew over to a piece of wood near the bubbling boulder, and I was able to get a picture of it. And I was running around like crazy because I had never seen one so close to the house before. But if the weather conditions are right, and it's hot and it's during migration in the fall, September, we've had warbler fallouts. We have gotten as many as 26 species of warblers coming to that bubbling boulder to drink and to bathe, and they hear the noise and they are attracted to the water, and it's just phenomenal. All the birds that come in during a hot fall migration. This little black-throated green thinks the water is burning its feet, I think. Magnolia warbler. Here's a video of a Tennessee warbler taking a bath. It's a little jerky, but I think you get the idea. For some reason, it's slow motion. But they just go crazy in that water, and this rock has little pools of water that they can use to bathe. And let's see if I can speed it up. Whoops. Wanted to show you this bird because blackpoll warblers are endangered in Pennsylvania. They only nest in a little small area of, let's see, it'd be kind of northeastern Pennsylvania. But we get them during migration. In the spring, they kind of look like a chickadee. They have a black head, stripes on them, and they feed in our cherry trees. They eat the insects in the cherry trees. But in the fall, we get them when they migrate south. And they're amazing little birds. They only weigh about equal to about, oh, maybe 14 paper clips, if you can imagine that. And they fly thousands and thousands of miles. They fly over the ocean. So they're the longest over water migration of any songbird. And they can fly down into Puerto Rico and northern South America. And they do it in about 3 days nonstop. Now they use prevailing winds to help them, but they're just an amazing bird. So again, you may not have the habitat where they would nest in your yard, but if you can provide food and water for them during their migration, that's the only time we ever see them, because they mainly nest up in Canada. But it's just amazing to see them show up. And of course, our little chipmunks benefit from that bubbling boulder too, because of the drink of the water. Scarlet tanagers show up, red-eyed vireos. They start having battles over who has the right to the water. Now, I already showed you this bird, but it was just on a perch. This is actually that molting indigo bunting. And that's what it looked like when it was taking its bath, a head dive into the pool of water. But here's that picture again, and you might notice one thing that's definitely a problem, and that's the fact that our kitchen window reflects so much of our backyard that birds don't realize it's a window. And we've had a lot of problems with window kills for birds. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because we've tried different things. We've tried decals, we tried bird screens. That's what you saw in the robin picture. We tried something called Kaleidoscape. None of them really worked very well. So then we tried Bird Crash Preventer, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then we're going to try Acopian bird savers on a window too, but it's really just our kitchen window that cried really hard one morning. This was in May of 2013. I was watching the outside, and I was watching a male scarlet tanager chase a female around in the trees. And before I knew it, the male had chased the female, and she hit the bottom of her kitchen window, and he hit the window right after her, and they both died of broken necks. I mean, it was just horrible. So we had to take drastic action to protect these birds that we love so much from getting killed on our kitchen window. So now what we do is we have bars at the top and the bottom, you can't see from the window, horizontal bars, and we stretch fishing line, and on top of the fishing line is garden netting, and that keeps the birds from hitting the windows. We still occasionally have a bird fly into the window, but it bounces off the netting. And the fishing line is there because it's UV, and birds can see UV light a lot better than we can. So it tells them that there's a barrier there. And you can use decals, but they have to be 4 inches apart and to work, and that would really destroy our view. So this has worked really well. We've had this for about 3 years, and we have not had any bird kills since we did this. So I feel much better about that situation, because Pennsylvania supports 15% of the global population of scarlet tanagers. So we have to do something to protect them. And I see we're getting short on time, so I'll run along here. Please keep your cats indoors though, even though cats might be well fed, they love to catch things and they love to feed on things. So now a little bit about cover, because cover is really important. The northern hardwood forest in Pennsylvania provides most of the cover. We're down in the southern part, but we have cover too with the Appalachian oak forest on our mountaintops. But it must be a treat if any of you live in the northern part of Pennsylvania where the Songbird Nursery is, the capital of Pennsylvania's nursery. But to add some cover to your backyard, if you could put in a brush pile or just a little pile of sticks, that helps a lot of the sparrows and a lot of other birds like wrens that like to get protection. Here's a Carolina wren. They visit our brush pile a lot, looking for insects. We've even had bears visit a brush pile that's farther back in the woods. And we thought that was neat. A trail camera got that picture, but then she showed up with some cubs. So we don't know if she gave birth to the cubs in the brush pile. It was a pretty big brush pile, but that was neat to see the bears. And we do have to be concerned about bears because they visit our backyard. That's an old version of our bird-friendly bird feeder. And when bears become really common in the summertime, then we stop feeding the birds, especially, for example, when a mother will bring in her 4 cubs, then we know it's time to put the food away. Or when there's a young male bear that comes over in broad daylight and grabs our peanut feeder, sits down and just lifts it up and gobbles it like candy. Okay, we stop feeding the bears. We stop feeding the birds too. As far as cover goes, you want to have old trees, dead trees, if it's safe to leave them standing or at least partially standing. It's amazing to think that chickadees have to use a cavity. They use one for nesting and they use one for roosting at night. And when you look at those tiny feet in that little bill, you don't think of them as being able to do much excavation. But a friend of ours, that's this picture, yeah, a friend of ours had an old birch tree, just part of a stump really in his yard. And we actually watched a chickadee excavate a nesting cavity in that old birch tree. So if the trees are soft enough, this was Dave Bontz's front porch view, if the trees are soft enough, the chickadees can use them. And cover is really important in the wintertime too. We don't mow any of our pollinator plots until late winter, early spring, because we know that food then is available for the birds. And it attracts a lot of sparrows like tree sparrows or white-throated sparrows that like to visit us. Rarely, but sometimes we see the white-crowned sparrows. And we get lots of fox sparrows during migration. And so they need that food and cover. And the more cover we have, then the more song sparrows, and some of them will stick around all winter. Our chipping sparrows are back, and they like to breed in heavy cover of evergreen trees. And we know they appreciate what we do for them because one of them landed on Mike's hat and spent at least 5 minutes sitting there looking around. Mike walked over to the kitchen door and I was able to get a quick picture before it flew away. But since we have big woods, we can leave den trees standing. So we have the screech owls showing up. We have great horned owls sometimes. And it helps to have those cavities because bluebirds, as you know, need cavities too. And so a variety of cover is really important. My nephew, when he was younger, great nephew actually, helped us make some bluebird houses. So that was a fun winter project and it paid off because, yeah, we get bluebirds and more bluebirds and they're feeding their young, which is fun to watch. We have different styles of nests. We saw bluebirds trying to fly into this box behind the house. That's when our ash tree was still alive. And so Mike got a ladder and climbed up there because the birds wouldn't go in. And he looked down, shone a flashlight down, and this little cute critter looked back up at him. And that was a flying squirrel. So you just don't know what might show up in some of your bird boxes, but we have different styles, and this is a Peterson box that attracted. Oh, I think I just saw a rose-breasted grosbeak out my window. I better hurry up, get some bird watching done. So bluebirds are really beautiful, but we get tree swallows in some of our boxes too. And just a little bit more cover. The more shrubs you can grow, the better, because a lot of our birds nest pretty low to the ground. So Sumac can get pretty big, but if you have room for it, that's a great place to have it, and it provides food too. A smaller version is the fragrant sumac, and there's a close-up. It kind of looks like poison ivy, but it's not. And it's a great shrubby place for birds. So is witch hazel. And then one shrub that we've planted, we've gotten the American hazelnut from Arbor Day Foundation. And this is a hybrid, it's not a straight species. But Mike joined the program to see if he could grow them. And it's amazing how many birds will build nests in that. And then of course the food is a treat for lots of wildlife. We usually don't get any to eat. We don't usually get to eat any because the squirrels have already gotten it. They've even taken over our picnic table and had their lunch of hazelnuts on there before we could get to it. But we found gray catbirds nesting in the hazelnut, beautiful eggs of a catbird nest. We have eastern towhees, and towhees are in trouble. You know, a lot of our birds are declining, and the more habitat you can provide, the better. Wood thrush still nest in our woods, thank goodness. And Pennsylvania supports 8.5% of the world population, so it's really important to provide habitat for wood thrush. And again, even if you don't have a big backyard, have some native plants and have cover, and birds like this American redstart will visit your backyard during migration. You know, we're lucky they breed in our property, but they still need your property for stopover sites. So does this yellow-rumped warbler, also called the butterbutt. And the black-throated green warbler will appreciate the native plants. And just remember, the white oak, the black cherry, birch, native willows, these native trees are really important to caterpillars and to birds. So I'll get off my soapbox opera now, and sorry it ran on so long, but if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer any questions. And it'd be easier if Kelly, unmutes everybody. Hey, there's Jared. Hi, Jared.
Laura, thank you so much. I could not care less over. I thought that was fantastic. You caught nearly all of the chat questions, but there was one about the bubbling boulder and where one goes about.
Goes about getting one?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, we just went to our local landscaping place. There's one in Duncansville, Pennsylvania, but I've seen this in other nurseries. And they have the big boulders. You can pick out one. They'll drill the hole for you with a diamond tip saw. If you want it delivered, they will deliver it. They even make kits now, we've seen. We've had ours for a long time, but they make kits where we had a hole dug and a liner put in and rocks in for the bottom part, but now they sell a plastic box. So it's a pretty much do-it-yourself project. It's not hard at all. And I would check with local landscaping stores. I think they would have them.
Someone asked for
Oh,
your
yes.
again, so I just put it back up on the screen.
Yes, I'm sorry. I forgot to leave that up there.
That's okay. I was the one that took it down. I was a little jumpy.
Okay.
While people are copying that down, does anyone else have any additional questions for Laura?
Okay, yeah, the miracle mix. Again, if you email me, I will send you the recipe for that. And it's bound to attract birds to your backyard. Squirrels like it too, though, so I have to caution you, and so do bears. Okay, now let me click on my chat. So there was a question. What is the one worst invasive? Oh, okay. On our property it's hard to say, there's so many. Japanese barberry is bad, but I would say Japanese vine honeysuckle is the worst because it grows up anything and it strangles it and it covers it with leaves so that the plant can't get sunlight and the vine is choking it. And so it's extremely hard to control. So please don't ever plant Japanese vine honeysuckle on your property. A question about the hummingbird feeders. I always watch for my Columbine to bloom, which is just about ready to bloom. So I put the feeders out this time of year, but it gets cold at night, so I bring the feeders in at night, because if a hummingbird shows up and your feeder has been out all night and it's been cold and they drink some of that really cold sugar water, they will actually go into a torpor. I've seen that happen once or twice, and then they'll kind of cling to the perch if you have perches on your feeder, and they'll just kind of hang down. So that's not good for hummingbirds. So that's how they survive the night too, when they go into a torpor, but you don't want your hummingbird feeder to cause that. So I put your feeders out now and just bring them in on cold evenings.
Laura, you've gotten incredible comments on, so many compliments on your photography. And there's one question from Cassie about if you have any recommendations for a lens for a beginner.
I think a zoom lens, 70 to 200 zoom lens, or a 100 to 400 zoom lens. They're more versatile and not as heavy. At one time, my husband had a 500 millimeter lens, but it was too heavy for me. He got great pictures with it. But you want a lens that you can use, it's not too heavy. So, and zoom gives you the versatility to stay in one spot and control how much you can see, zoom in or zoom out. So we really do like Canon lenses. Nikon is just as good. So any of the Nikon cameras, Canon Rebel is what we had for a long time. But yeah, if you want to take wildlife pictures, you need a longer lens. Or a photography blind too, that always helps.
So Laura, to close out our Earth Day special, which you've just done an amazing job with, and I can't thank you enough. One of the last questions in the chat box was, what is your favorite bird?
Oh, well, that varies from day to day. It depends on what I see, but I really do like golden-winged warblers, I have to admit. And I didn't show any pictures of those in this slideshow because they're not a backyard bird. And even though we did a big golden-winged warbler project on 27 acres, we haven't gotten any golden-winged warblers yet. But my sister, who lives close by, has golden-winged warblers on her property. And they're a species headed towards extinction, and they need young forests. So I guess I'd have to pick that one, but that's a hard choice.
Fair enough.
All
right.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for putting up with me. And I just wanted to give you a personal invitation. You're welcome to come visit at any time. Just email me. We give tours to the public on our property, and we'd love to have you as a visitor.
That's fantastic, Laura. Thank you so much. All of you who are still on, if you're interested in more about Audubon's native plant database or the backyard habitat program, just go to audubon.org and you'll find lots of information there. There's also tons of recommendations for feeders and different containers and different types of gardens and native plants to use on your property. Thank you so much for joining us on Earth Day 50. And thank you, Laura Jackson, so much. This was incredible. And I just, your knowledge and expertise in sharing this with us was just, we're super grateful for it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
All right, everyone, enjoy your day. Thanks for coming.
Yep, happy Earth Day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
welcome.
Thank you, Aunt Laura.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.